Making a sequel to a great video game can be a real challenge. You need to come up with new things while making everything that was good about the first game even better. The sequels on this list all left us feeling disappointed, whether they were underdeveloped or simply took the wrong direction. Here are 10 disappointing sequels to great games.
The Demon Slayer, Dante.
The first Devil May Cry was an absolute masterpiece of a game. The stylish Dante provided some amazing action, and fans were eagerly awaiting the sequel. Devil May Cry 2 turned out to be a huge bummer. The game looked worse than the original, and the gameplay was very repetitive. The developers basically messed up everything that is good about the franchise. However, they later redeemed themselves with the excellent Devil May Cry 3, which saved the series from an early death. Perfect Dark was such a great shooter on the Nintendo 64. We spent so many childhood days playing the excellent multiplayer mode with our friends. We were really hyped for the sequel on the brand new Xbox 360. However, Perfect Dark Zero didn't even come close to its predecessor.
Joe, we got multiple civilians inside the club. Going in there guns blazing is too risky. Get them out by triggering the fire alarm.
Other groundbreaking shooters like Halo made this feel dated before it even came out. The controls were terrible, and the story was very underwhelming. Perfect Dark Zero simply couldn't compete with modern shooters and doomed the franchise for good. Dragon Age is an epic role-playing game, and sequels to those kind of things normally take years to be released. However, Dragon Age 2 came out less than 18 months after the first game. The rushed development didn't do it any favors. It has many recycled environments, and its gameplay felt more at home in an action game than an RPG.
I'm sorry. You're not really seeing the Dalish at their best.
Gone was the open-ended nature that made the first game so great, and fans were not happy about that. Dragon Age 2 will always be a textbook example of a game that was rushed out the door and suffered for it.
Let's finish this!
It's tough to follow up one of the most beloved games of all time. However, the developers took a bad risk with Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link. Changing the camera from a top-down to a side-scrolling perspective had a negative impact on the gameplay. The story, and especially the English translation of it, wasn't up to par. What remains is a pretty frustrating game that doesn't even come close to living up to the hype of the original. The original Deus Ex revolutionized the first-person shooter genre. This cyberpunk game gave you more options to tackle a situation other than simply shooting your way out. Fans were hyped for the sequel, but Deus Ex Invisible War turned out to be a big letdown. The developers made a generic shooter with role-playing elements and a very linear story.
We appreciate your resourcefulness in seeking us out.
I guess we'll see if it was worth my time and effort.
All the freedom of the original game was gone, and this upset a lot of fans. It's not a terrible game, but compared to the first Deus Ex, it was a major disappointment. We loved Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic so much when it came out. However, the same cannot be said for the sequel. Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2 was made by another developer, and that shows. The game basically launched unfinished, and it has lots of bugs. After the launch of the game, hackers even found lots of missing data in the game files.
Take them down. Let's settle this.
This is such a shame because it actually has a very interesting story with loads of great characters. It's not that the game was bad, it just felt incomplete, and that is very disappointing.
A strange coincidence.
It is no coincidence. There is some larger plan at work here, and we are walking into it. This is too convenient to be anything but a trap.
Castlevania, Lords of Shadow was a great reboot of the famous series. It set up a very interesting universe with great voice acting and an interesting story. Unfortunately, this all got squandered in the sequel. The developers focused the story on Dracula and his emotions, which really didn't pay off.
You are no fool, Gabriel.
I am no longer Gabriel, woman. I am the dragon, Dracul. I am the Prince of Darkness.
The gameplay also took a turn for the worse, with lots of awful stealth segments that were extremely frustrating. Publisher Konami wasn't happy, and they parted ways with the developer Mercury Steam after 17 years of service.
Great. Let's move on.
Crackdown gave us the first open-world sandbox game on the Xbox 360. It was a very addictive game with loads of great enemies and collectibles. Crackdown 2 completely ruined this by adding zombies to the mix. This lazy sequel had loads of uninspired missions where you simply had to defend a point from zombies.
Here come the freaks. Watch your HUD and tracker. It'll show any freaks attacking the beacon. Dispatch them quickly.
The gameplay of the original was nowhere to be found, and it made Crackdown 2 boring to play. It turned out that the game had a troubled development cycle and was rushed out the door. We're very glad Microsoft decided to delay the third game, so they didn't make the same mistake again. Completely changing the gameplay of a famous game can be a very risky move. Like the time they turned Pac-Man into an adventure game. We learnt a lot of things we didn't want to know about the yellow hero in the sequel, like the fact that he's a complete wimp and runs away screaming from everything that stands in his way. Pac-Man also has marital problems at home, which is just really weird. On top of that, the gameplay could be frustrating at times due to the lack of control and many bizarre puzzles. Pac-Man 2: The New Adventures really makes you wonder what they were thinking. Prince of Persia: Warrior Within is the gritty reboot of the excellent Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time. Ubisoft wasn't happy with the sales of the first game and decided a more mature version of the Prince would sell better. The sequel got a gothic look, lots of gore, and a soundtrack full of metal. The darker tone took away everything fans loved about the first entry in the series. The Prince lost all his charm, and it was very hard to like this wannabe tough guy. Thankfully, Ubisoft course-corrected most of this with the third game, but that doesn't make Prince of Persia: Warrior Within any less embarrassing.
Can we talk this out?
Do you know any other examples of disappointing video games in a series? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel.